Hello, everybody. It's showtime. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our Mark Richardson webinar. Introducing today's webinar is me, Jen Clark, and I'm a Senior Marketing Manager at Surefire Social, and I'm also joined by my team members, Steve Eastlack and Surefire Local CMO, Sashi Belamkanda. And we're all extremely excited to welcome Mark Richardson. He's a renowned thought leader for the home improvement industry, and he's going to be leading today's discussion on growth strategies for 2017. Okay, so a brief backstory on Surefire. Our founder and CEO, Chris Morentis, started Surefire Local with the goal of helping local businesses win in the digital space and compete equally. Our mantra at Surefire is your web presence is more than just your website, and therefore you must orchestrate your web presence in symphony, including your website, your social media, your local directories, your reviews, and everything in between. And in order to be in all the places that your customers go to find business online. Today, successful remodelers and roofing contractors and other home improvement pros across North America use Surefire Local's marketing technology and our services to get high-quality leads to solve their hyper-local marketing challenges. Okay, so during the webinar, the team and I are going to be taking your comments in the chat widget. You can communicate with us using the question box in the webinar control panel. It's on the right-hand side of your screen. See if you can locate that right now. We'll give you just a couple of seconds to find that. Okay. Has everyone been able to find the chat box? You can let us know by telling us where you're joining us from. I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to send over your locations. Okay, Washington, D.C., New Jersey, Las Vegas, Denver, Toledo. We've got a pretty diverse group here today. Minneapolis, California, welcome, welcome. We will also be sending messages and discussion questions to the whole group. So periodically throughout the webinar, just check the chat box. We'll also share resources, links, questions to the audience. Okay, moving on to today's special offer. It's true, one lucky attendee will be taking home a Google Home. But don't worry if you don't win today's offer. You also have the chance to go home with a Google Chromecast. Everyone here today is eligible, and you'll be eligible by getting a digital marketing consult with Surefire. We'll give you more details on that at the end of today's webinar. Also, now that we're on a roll with today's giveaways, we've got a special giveaway for today's webinar attendees. Mark Richardson and the team at Surefire have a copy of Mark's book, Fit to Grow, 12 Business Themes from Growth. They're for everyone in the audience today. So if you'd like to get this ebook, sorry, it's not an ebook, it's an actual book. If you'd like to get it, send us your shipping address to marketing@Surefire Local. It's a real honor for all of us here at Surefire to have Mark at our headquarters to host today's webinar. Mark has many accomplishments. He's a member of the NAHB Remodeling Hall of Fame. He's a fellow at Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies. He was named Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year for construction and real estate. He's presented to thousands of businesses and leaders across the country at top conferences. His accomplishments also span into the digital space. He hosts a podcast for home improvement professionals. It's called Remodeling Mastery. And during the podcast, he offers guidance on how businesses can position themselves for success. We'll be sharing a link to that in the chat for everyone so that you can sign up for the podcast. And if you haven't started listening to podcasts, let us know. We can give you some instructions on how to start listening to podcasts on your phone. Now I'm going to pass things over to Mark. Mark, thanks again for hosting today's webinar.
My pleasure, Jen, and it's great to be back and sort of sharing, I think, a few insights. I think the timing of this particular webinar is especially appropriate. Just literally yesterday was in a Harvard meeting in Washington, D.C. with some of the leading manufacturers, builders, suppliers from all over the country, sort of sharing their insights. And certainly, while the world we live in is a little bit strained, I think, we certainly are seeing a lot of really positive signs and upticks, and literally across the board of the 50 members, every single member of this particular Harvard group was optimistic and looking at sort of a positive outlook in terms of 2017. So the title of this session is Growth Strategies for 2017. I think some of the things that you'll be hearing today, are very relevant to certainly the times, but I think for those of you that have either read my columns or my books or listened to the podcast series Remodeling Mastery know that, I'm a big believer that if, businesses are not growing, they're declining or they're dying. And, I think for many, when I say that, it sounds, a little bit serious, but the reality is growth is not necessarily just about sales and profit. Growth is also about creating opportunities. Growth is also about innovation and technologies. And I think as you look at growth, and we'll be talking more about that today, how you go about defining growth for yourself has a lot to do with, I think, your success. So 3 parts of what I want to get into today. One is I want to spend some time talking about the industry and industry insights. I think it's safe to say that most of you, if not all of you, didn't necessarily attend remodeling university because it doesn't really exist. So I think, in addition to coming from more of a remodeling and design background, I've had the benefit of looking sort of at the industry, I think, from a unique way. So I'm going to share, I think, some of those insights because as you think about growth, just like as you think about any sports, you need to understand the game if, in fact, you're going to successfully play in it. The second element that I'll get into is about growth and about motivations for growth and about how you need to frame it for yourself. And then lastly, I'm going to spend some time talking about some of the factors that you need to put in place, sort of the pillars you need to put in place if you want to see successful growth moving forward. So the first thing I would encourage you to think about is understanding sort of the business cycles. Oftentimes I think when we're at an association meeting or at some sort of event talking about the construction or remodeling industry, we sort of tend to look at these segments very equally. But the reality is, Harvard used to think that the new home construction market used to be counter-cyclical to remodeling. We know now that we've got, 30, 40 years of data and history that the cycles are really the same. What's different is the peaks and valleys or the severity of the peaks and valleys. So new home, for example, which is on obviously a very strong incline right now, has very high, very low peaks and valleys. Matter of fact, after the crash in 2008, it dropped down about 75%. Larger design build type businesses also have peaks and valleys. They're just not as extreme. The kitchen and bath market, again, tends to be much, much more stable. And then certainly with the smaller scale projects, there's always, I think, a greater need for that. So as you think about this, these businesses aren't created equal. How you fall into these has a lot to do with how much of a roller coaster, we're certainly going to be experiencing moving forward. Matter of fact, one of the interesting insights that was shared by an economist yesterday was about 10 months ago, the folks out there sort of predicting the future were expecting a recession or some sort of soft level of recession within 11 or 12 months. However, today, literally 10 months later, they're looking at about a 27-month cycle out there in terms of the next potential softening. And again, I think that bodes very well for all of you that are focused in the remodeling industry, that there really is, I think, a fair amount of time to really position yourself, and I think 2017 is a good example of that. I think another slide that I wanted to share with you, and that is, all these remodeling categories, just to reinforce it further, are not created equal. In that, if you look at this simple snapshot from a few years ago, you had literally the level of change or the level of growth in some of these sectors that was more than double one another. from exterior replacements, the windows, the siding, at an 8% growth level at that particular snapshot, whereas kitchen and bath was more like 18. So as you think about your business, I think it's important that you think about it like a portfolio. You know, do you have a lot of the right level of blend of stocks within that portfolio? I think another element is understanding sort of failure rates. You know, one of the benefits as you get up to certain altitudes in terms of growth, as this illustrates, is the likelihood of failure within the businesses actually goes down. A smaller business, while it seems very safe and low risk, tends to have much, much higher levels of risk of failure, as you can see during this sort of periods of time from 2003 up to 2012. So as you think about your business, the scale at which you have the business has a lot to do with the risk and certainly the failure rates. So let me take a walk down sort of 2016 and share some of the insights that really help, I think, to summarize sort of where we were last year, what the outcomes of last year. The first is the Lira. The Lira is one of the key indicators for the remodeling industry. It's actually a Harvard indicator that looks at many different factors together, including interest rates and employment and housing starts and permits, all these different factors, and sort of puts it all together and predicts what the remodeling activity is. And in 2016, it was up between 5 and 10%, and they're expecting a very similar level of year in 2017. Now, what's interesting about this is people look at 5 to 10% in terms of it being up from the previous year, and they're very either impressed by themselves because they were at that. The better remodeling companies were actually up well into the double digits in 2016, as I'll highlight. The kitchen and bath industry continues to be one of the most strongest sort of sectors that are out there. So again, just like having a portfolio, if you tend to have a lot of your focus in the business in kitchen and bath, it's a pretty safe place to be for many reasons. Another indicator that I think, or another factor that I think a lot of people don't appreciate, is that the larger design build firms, the biggest element that they're growing in the business is in fact because of the average tickets themselves. Most of the larger design build firms were reporting the average sales per project going up at a rate of about 20, 25, 30%. And in many cases, that's where a lot of the growth is coming from. The election effect, a little bit less than what was predicted. Matter of fact, I lead a group of thought leaders, and of these 15 to 18 thought leaders, literally in the beginning of 2016, 2/3 of them were very concerned about the effect of the election potentially paralyzing remodeling activity. And as they sort of reported their findings at the election or right after the elections, it had very little effect in terms of remodeling activity and remodeling demand. Another key, I think, that we're seeing out there bubbling up is the whole aging in place market. It's really becoming not just sort of an interesting business model, but a real growth, I think, opportunity. Some businesses are diversifying in this. Major manufacturers are putting more energy into this particular market, and it's one that, as we watch the demographic of the older that clients get, the stronger I think that's going to be. Online reviews. Actually, this was a report almost a year ago that was really fascinating at a Harvard meeting, that the home services director reported in a survey from Google that clients are giving more value to online reviews than personal referrals. And I think for this industry, that's a real game changer. That if you're not focused, I think, on the online reviews and the online reputation management, then it's very easy, I think, to slip backwards. Major shift in terms of the client demographics of remodeling. Now, this is happening really at both ends. As already mentioned, the aging in place certainly is happening in large part because the baby boomers are certainly getting older and becoming more than matures. But the other end of that spectrum is also an important one. I actually did a tour last year, and I asked a group of remodelers in 6 different markets and cities, how did they see the shift in terms of the 30-somethings representing sort of real influence in the remodeling? And they took the clock back 10 years, and it was only about 5 to 10% of their business, whereas in 2016, most were reporting 30 to 35% were in fact that younger generation. And what's interesting is the younger generation, yes, they're getting into the remodeling market maybe a little bit later than I think the baby boomers, but they're caring about the home. They have different needs. So understanding the client demographic moving forward, I think, is a key element, I think, to your success. Technology will revolutionize, I think, this industry. It certainly has. The processes, the products, the client experience, the whole speed at which we're doing things, I think, makes a tremendous difference. And then the last element that I really want to touch on is the top remodeling businesses out there were reporting 20% or more in growth in 2016. So as you sit back and reflect on all these elements, I think it creates a pretty positive picture of the past, and at least all the signs, based on what I was hearing yesterday from the leading manufacturers as well as the thought leader remodelers, are expecting a very strong 2017 as well. So some of the key environmental indicators that I think you should, in your local market, keep an eye on. Because at the end of the day, I can or anybody can talk about national sort of efforts. But, as Tip O'Neill said, all politics are local. And I would argue your remodeling business is local. And what you should be caring about is those environmental indicators that are more local. But looking at this from a little bit a higher level, the one that's clearly one of the more important ones out there is home appreciation. Home appreciation, it continues to be very strong. We're not experiencing certainly the frenzy that we experienced back in the go-go times of 2003, 2004, but it continues to be the majority of the markets are appreciating in the United States. Interest rates not only continue to be strong, but it's very favorable. But what's interesting about interest rates is that it could also have a positive effect on remodeling, as they're all predicted to start to inch up a little bit. Now, this may not help the new construction sector, but it should help the remodeler in that they will stay put, not move into the new home, but also it creates a sense of urgency for the clients to act. Employment and the fact that unemployment is expected to be especially strong. It's especially strong. Maybe there's some political issues, maybe some economic issues out there, but the reality is, as long as people feel the confidence that they'll have a job, the likelihood that they'll invest into the home actually increases. The housing demand. This is another factor, again, a little bit of a double-edged sword on the labor element here, but the housing demand continues to be very, very strong. Matter of fact, most of the large builders even reported they cannot keep up with the gap between the demand and, in fact, their ability to build. And certainly the stock market. While you may not be going out and putting money in the stock market on a very personalized level, it is a pretty good indicator of the level of confidence that's out there. And all this adds up to consumer confidence. In the remodeling industry, consumer confidence is really the driver of, I think, so much of what's happening. And as long as we see these stars and planets out there, as I've outlined here, continue to be strong, we should see the result of that be strong consumer confidence. So, again, a little bit more on industry insights, understanding some of the key business differences out there between different remodelers all around the country. One is the client demographic. Is your business really designed for more the aging in place, for the baby boomer, or for the millennial? The specialty versus full service. Now, we're seeing some of these come more together. Specialty services starting to integrate in some of either the kitchen and bath into the business, or full service looking for ways to use specialty type techniques. The business versus a practice, oftentimes has to do with the scale of the business and the owner's role. Showrooms versus in-home selling. Again, there's a lot of interesting things happening. Matter of fact, there's a lot of even a third category, which is more of an online selling that's happening out there, where there's selling being done and being highlighted in Professional Remodeler magazine as we speak on this topic. The whole labor dynamic is different from businesses to businesses, types and sizes of projects. One of the biggest differences, though, out there is the lead generation activity and methods. In the past, I think for the most part, we were relying upon personal referrals, job signs, word of mouth in terms of that level of advertising. However, most healthy businesses have the right sort of blend of these activities that are coming together. Who's providing the financing? This is an interesting factor. Matter of fact, there's some interesting things even happening on the design-build front when it comes to financing. So keep an eye out on how your financing acumen will have an influence in the future. Your sales processes. Is it more of a consultative or a one-sit approach? Again, I think these are some of the key businesses and certainly the relationship with technology. So let's talk about growth. For so many years, I truly believe that, again, as I said earlier, businesses, had very similar motivations. They all needed to be focused on growth, and quite frankly, even how they would define growth, I thought was similar. In the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity to sort of look behind the curtain of the best and the best out there, and what I'm really finding is there's some dramatic differences in the fundamental motivations of different businesses and their growth. So the key to this next slide, I think, is not to judge, but it's most important to ask the question for yourself, what's your motivation when it comes to growth? So let me unpack the 7 motivations that I'm seeing out there. Number 1 is that the owner is just happy to have a job. Needless to say, this tends to be a smaller scale type of remodeler that may have lost their job. Now they have a remodeling business. They can control their own destiny by going from project to project and have a job. Another motivator is being more entrepreneurial, more innovative. One of the key elements I think that's out there, matter of fact, this was highlighted yesterday, that one of the ways that manufacturers are looking at addressing even the labor problem is through innovation, through looking for different ways to do things better and faster. That way, potentially taking off some of the labor shortage issue, I think, moving forward. But if your motivation is more entrepreneurial, it's more innovative, then you need to think about how you grow your business with that in mind. Is it more of an investor motivator? One of the reasons that very few roll-ups are happening in this industry is most investors or equity groups that want to step in, they want to see a very high return. Most remodeling businesses, the returns are relatively modest, but there are a handful of businesses out there that look for good, solid, modest returns, but it's really more about the investment and the return on investment necessarily than anything else. Another motivator is the business itself. It has a life of its own. This was something that certainly hit a chord very much for me in terms of how I looked at business, is it was in fact about the team, it was about the product, and it was about the client. Another motivator is ego. I think some people have larger egos than, quite frankly, than their interest in profitability, quality of the product, or even the client itself. Is that your motivator? Is it more important for you to be on the cover of a magazine or being sort of highlighted more in terms of your motivation and your ego than anything else? Another motivation that I see out there, and this is even more prevalent today than it was, I think, 10 or 20 years ago, is that you have a cause that's greater than the business, it's greater than the fundamental product. The cause could be wrapped around energy, it could be wrapped around aging, it could be wrapped around just how do you create sort of a community kind of element within the business and leveraging that as a cause. And the last one, I think, which is oftentimes a predominant motivation, is the legacy. Now, legacy could, in fact, be a product of a family, but it also could be product of the next generation of your team. As you think about this slide and look at it, most are a blend of a couple of these, or maybe even a few of these. But what's most important in understanding this is, what is your motivation in business? What do you care about? Do you communicate this to other key members in your business and certainly the rest of your team? So how you think about defining growth in 2017 is extremely important. Some people look at it in terms of top-line growth. It's all about sales. It's a very simple way to measure. It's not good or bad. It's just a way to measure and how you compare in terms of some of the market. It could also be your market share. Are you getting a bigger share of the market? Now, in the manufacturing community, they're especially concerned about this because this is also what helps them get through, I think, more recessionary times. It could also be your project blend, which again helps you in terms of levels of risk in looking at things in the future. Another way to look at growth is also the team growth or team development. You know, I think those that truly believe that their people are the greatest assets, they may be focused more on the team growth and creating the right sort of leadership opportunities within the organization. Profitability, needless to say, is always important. But if you're investing a lot in top-line growth, you might sacrifice a little bit of profitability to invest it back into the business. Client experience. You know, what's interesting, I had a meeting with one of the heads of Anderson at the IBS show, and one of the comments that he made, the number one factor that he is focused on moving forward is the client experience. That he believes that that's the real test of health and fitness with remodeling businesses. The business fitness itself, you know, that's a way to get your growth. Think about this as sort of a grade card. You know, you want consistently all A's and B's and not a real diversity in terms of the fitness of the business. And then lastly, some of it's wrapped around your growth could be your strategic alliances and relationships. I think most people believe that really grow the business, that has a lot to do with your future. So I'm a big believer in this notion of change. You know, one of the key factors that fundamentally successful businesses have is they truly believe that if a business is not adjusting or changing, it will become irrelevant. And I think as you think about the growth in your business, it's important to understand change from a little bit different level. So as you look at the subject of change, you know, look back at it 10 years ago, sort of before the crash. What was going on during those go-go times of 2005, 2006, to even up to 2007? You know, your clients were out there, they had a mantra, just do it. Where today, they're focused on just discussing it. The level of deliberation, the transparency that's out there, information. There's a lot more research that client is doing today. You've got to not fight it. You've got to engage and be part of that process. 10 years ago, your clients were willing to take risks. Now, why might that have been? Well, because they were experiencing double-digit appreciation in their home, so it almost didn't matter the amount of money they were willing to put in. Where today, they want the balanced level of risk. In the past, the clients would find you, whereas today, you have to get out and you have to find the clients. You have to be more of a hunter and not sit back and just wait for the harvest to come in. High-touch marketing 10 years ago was the way that you thought that was the only way to do things, whereas today, high-tech marketing continues to increase for the better companies out there to have the right blend in your business. 10 years ago, you could just follow the client's fantasy, whereas today, your job is to be the voice of reason when it comes to homeowners and the clients. Your job today is to be able to focus on how to control the fantasy, not just following what they're fantasizing about. 10 years ago, you could focus on what the product was. Today, you also need to focus on how the client is buying from you. Again, it's got to involve the technologies. It's got to involve the buying process. Some of your clients want to do business fast. Some of them want to deliberate and do it slow. Some of them want more care and feeding, and others want to make decisions very, very quickly. So as you look at this simple slide, are you operating on the right side, or are you sort of still living a little bit in the past from 10 years ago? Those companies that are operating on the right side are not only out there successful, but they're out there making it happen as well.
Thank you, Mark. We're going to take a quick pause now for today's poll. As I mentioned earlier, we're offering a complimentary digital consultation for all of today's attendees and a free Google Chromecast for everyone who qualifies. Mark's trained our team to conduct a business fitness evaluation here based on his best-selling book, Fit to Grow. And the marketing consult's a one-on-one session. It allows you to take full advantage of the insights Mark's sharing today and to find out how you can create a robust web presence in 2017 for your business and start generating a predictable flow of new customers, first and foremost. When you attend your consult, our experts will help you identify missed opportunities across your online presence, from your social media to your directories and your reviews and your website. Also, if you missed out earlier, we're offering all attendees a copy of Mark Richardson's book, Fit to Grow. So if you'd like to get a copy of that book, you can also send us an email at marketing@surefirelocal.com to get your copy, and we'll send that over to you. So everyone, if you just take a couple of moments now to fill out the poll, your options here are, would you like a digital marketing consult and a copy of today's presentation? You can select any of the following. Yes, I want both, a digital marketing consult, or send me the presentation. We've got about 63% participation right now. So if you can just send in your last votes, and if you have any questions for Mark, we can take some time now to address those. Okay, I think we can close up today's poll. If you missed out on this, just send us an email and we'll get you set up with your digital marketing consult.
Thank you, Jen. So diving back in, again, we've covered sort of some industry insights. We've talked about the subject of growth. I really want to give you some key questions here, and these are, quite frankly, so simple that they're almost a little bit patronizing for you to be asking yourself. However, I think the reality is, where you head moving forward can be a little bit confusing. And I love this little quote: if you don't know the answer, at least know the question. The reality is most of you don't necessarily know the answers, but you will, in fact, I think, be successful if you continue to ask the questions. So the first question, I think, is so important, and that's why grow. I can certainly answer that for you, and I can give you 10 reasons that you should think about growing your business, not the least of which it creates opportunities for people that you care about. If you really think about it, will you be happy doing what you're doing now 3 to 5 years from now? It's really only going to be the growth within your business that sort of pushes you forward to different altitudes. This is also true, I think, with your key team members. The second question is, am I ready to grow? I think that there's oftentimes a thirst for growth, a yearning for growth, but not necessarily the right positioning for growth. Think about this in sports. If you get out there, you may be having the fantasy of going out and running the marathon, but you may not be in shape or ready for it. So you've got to really examine, I think, and ask yourself, think about your team. Think about how well positioned you are. And I'm going to certainly talk a little bit more about this. Also, what do you need to grow? You have to not only be clear in terms of the why growth and are you ready, but you also need to be clear with respect to what are those key sort of chess moves that need to happen for you to be successful. And lastly, don't forget about the level of alignment. Are your growth goals aligned? One of the fundamental differences I see with the great companies and the good ones out there is alignment. Great companies are aligned. The leadership within the companies, the team is aligned with each other. So you might have the yearning, you might be ready to grow, but you might need to be spending a little bit more time on the actual alignment itself. So let's spend some time talking about some factors for successful growth. As you think about these, I like to think about, growth. I like to think about health of business. I like to think about it in terms of its components. Maybe this is because of more of a remodeling or architectural background, but think of it like a series of pillars for a moment here. I'm going to be talking about one of the pillars that we're going to be getting into is that needs to be successful or for success is the environment. The second is we're going to talk about is the product itself. You need to have that as a factor to keep an eye on. The third is your team. The fourth is the fundamental business health. And then the last one is taking a look at sort of the leadership element within the business itself. So let's unpack each one of these pillars, I think, moving forward. The first one I want to talk about is the environment. I talked about, what those stars and planets were a little bit earlier, but let's sort of take this a little bit more in detail as we talk about 2017 and what those factors are for growth. The first that you need to make sure is that there's a right level of consumer demand. Consumer demand out there, I think, is not necessarily just in terms of appreciation and interest rates and consumer confidence, but it's also drilling into the consumer demand with the product and service that you particularly have. This is something that you could sort of more subjectively try to get an understanding of, but you also, today more than ever, by either reviewing some of the surveys from some of the technology companies, from Google, from House, from many of the others, you can keep a pulse, I think, on the consumer demand in a fairly successful way to really use as a litmus test to see if, in fact, the environment is really positioned for your success. The second is the fundamental market conditions themselves. Now, I've given you some of those indicators a little bit earlier, but when we're seeing sort of all the pluses, all the up signs, all the thumbs up, then that's, again, very, very positive in terms of one of the factors that you want. And then the last one is the competitive dynamic. What's interesting is I travel around the country. There are very different sort of dynamics in terms of the competitive environment that's out there. Some markets, for example, in terms of either specialty windows, siding, roofing, are very different than others in different parts of the country. Similarly, I think some of the design build or full service markets are different in the country. Bathroom, kitchen type remodeling, that varies dramatically in different parts of the country. So you might have a very good product and service from a consumer demand, very good market conditions, but your lack of success is purely just because of the competition that you're running up against in your market. The flip side of that is also true. If you have no competition or very little competition for the product and service, you can certainly deal with it, I think, at a little bit softer level of market condition or consumer demand. The second one I want to talk about is the right product itself. I think one of the key elements, I think, to any success is really choosing and having the right products. As I look at some of the companies that are diversified out there, some of the weaker products are what's pulling some of those companies down. So how do you want to think about your right product? The first is it easy to buy? Is it easy for the client to understand? Is it easy for them to be able to comprehend and make their selections and decisions and buy this product from you? The second, is it really relevant? Does it really relevant in terms of meeting kind of the market conditions and also the trends of what the client cares about? And certainly the last, as I continue to talk about, is you've got to focus today not just about what the product is, but how the client is buying it and experiencing it. And certainly the technologies that go behind it with some of the 3D modeling and the virtual reality is so important in that perspective. The next one I think you need to think about is your team. Your team, I think, is one of the key factors moving forward. Matter of fact, at the Harvard meeting yesterday, at least about a third of the folks, they talked about the importance of the team, the importance of the labor market. A good friend of mine, one of the leading remodelers in the country, he sort of coined this little phrase, those companies that master the labor moving forward are going to be the most successful companies. And as you really think about this, mastering the labor is about making labor the priority, making talent the priority. If you can make talent, if you can make the team the priority, chances are you're going to be more successful. You're going to be more successful not only in terms of finding the right ones, but also retaining the talent as well. Training. What's interesting about training is that we all know the importance of training when it comes to your team. However, we don't necessarily realize that training is a growth strategy. Training needs to have a return on investment. A few years ago, I actually led a group of some of the top remodelers. And of this particular group of 14 companies, 4 of them in the recessionary times increased more time and energy in training, and 10 of them, because of the expense, reduced the amount of training they were doing. The 4 companies, all 4 companies, during these difficult times experienced double-digit growth, while the other 10 shrunk the business. It just confirmed this notion of you've got to look at training as not only a growth strategy, but also as a retention strategy, a cultural element within your team. The third element when it comes to your team, I think realizing the importance of synergy, realizing the importance that it is an environment, it's not a solo sport anymore, it's a team sport. And those companies that I think are focused on the team sport mentality and the culture, it not only fits, I think, certainly the snapshot of today, but as you look at the new generations that are out there coming into the workforce, what they really care about is the experience with your company as much as the remuneration. The next one I want to talk just a little bit about is the business fitness itself. We're out there today, regardless how you're looking at it, we're climbing sort of the Rocky Mountains, not strolling through the Shenandoahs. It is tough out there in business today. And you've got to focus sort of holistically and breathe in the culture of your business just as much as you need to do the product and certainly the team and the environment. The first thing I want you to think about is the culture. Culture is all about sort of the team rowing together, the team functioning sort of in the right framework. Colin said, today, culture eats strategy for lunch. And you've got to think about it in that way. Your culture in your company today has a lot to do with your health and fitness. The second is, when it comes to fitness, your business has to become more dependent on the processes and systems and not less. Those businesses that have really drilled down into the processes and systems, there are absolutely the ones that are seeing those extra little margins here and there. The third element, I think, when it comes to business fitness today is technology. Years ago we used to talk about, technology will revolutionize this business. It really has revolutionized it. Technology has to become an integral part of your thinking today, not necessarily an option or a choice. We led a group on home technologies up at Harvard in the fall, and it's fascinating the level of change and the speed at what's happening in terms of the change in technology. Not only from the consumer side, where your clients know more about products and service than you do, more about cost than you, but they also know more about you than you do in terms of the level of transparency that's out there. So as you really think about your fundamental fitness and how to position yourself for growth, make sure that you're looking at it not just about, how well you're doing something, but these other factors as well. The fifth of the factors that I want to touch on today that I think is so important, and that is the factor of leadership. Matter of fact, early on when I wrote my book, How Fit Is Your Business, I was doing a talk up in Detroit, and I had someone after the talk ask me, which of the 10 criteria of a fit business is most important? And as I remember at the time, it's sort of like asking which of your children are the most important. And I sort of had to pause. But as I did, I really then answered the question. Leadership is the most important element in terms of, I think, a fundamentally fit business. So as you think about this, one of the areas you need to think about, I think, is the leadership gaps. Leadership is not just about you and the owner. It's the gaps within your leadership team, the gaps within it laterally, the gaps in terms of the distance between you and the other leaders. Making sure that that's a priority, that you're closing that gap, you're actually creating a fundamental and synergistic and aligned leadership team has got to be a priority moving forward. The second, as you think about growth, is who is, in fact, going to champion different initiatives and projects. Whether they're projects focused on your improvement, whether they're projects focused on growth of a new product or division of the company, or even a satellite office. One of the fundamental differences between success and failure has a lot to do with who the champion is and who's going to own it and be accountable. And the last element, I think, of leadership is making sure that you're looking in the mirror at your own leadership. Do you have the right mindset? Are you the visionary? Are you leading the way versus responding just to the dissident voices out there? Your team today, I think more than ever, needs your leadership. They need you to focus not just on the short term, but really investing the time and energy into the long term as well. So as I come to conclusion with some of my remarks today about positioning for the future, one of the interesting things I see out there with companies, they're great companies of the past that have moved to what I would consider more good companies. But there's also many good companies that have an opportunity to be great. But unless you understand the difference between good and great, it's very hard, I think, for you to really compare yourself and know where you want to be heading. The first element is, I think there are many good companies out there that they truly believe change is an option. The great ones out there, they realize that change is not an option. If you're not changing, you're going to become irrelevant. And that's the ultimate insult for you, for your team, and for your clients. The good ones out there, I think, fundamentally have good cultures, good people, good products, good services. However, the great ones have the great cultures. These are the ones that are winning awards in terms of the great places to work, and they make that a priority within the organization and the business. The good ones tend to be very project focused. They think about, they talk about the projects. However, the great ones are really very client-centric. They realize the lifetime value of the client. They realize that the client experience is what makes them great, not necessarily the project or the sticks and bricks that you create. The good ones have a good, fundamental, solid team, whereas the great ones have not only strong teams, but as I highlighted earlier, they're also very aligned teams. These are teams that are rowing together, that understand the left hand from the right hand in terms of what is the vision and the goal and how you want to move forward. The good ones have satisfied clients. They check it off the list. They even speak in those terms. The great ones have raving fans. And also they're almost rabid fans in many ways of the business and the company and the people. If you don't have raving fans, you just have satisfied clients. That is not at all a guarantee that the client is going to come back. Matter of fact, if you really think about it, most homeowners out there, they think of their relationship with you, whether you like it or not, as a transaction. And they have a lot of choices who to transact with next. You really have to focus on creating raving fans if, in fact, you want that client to be coming back in the future. The good ones out there, they sit and I think they watch. They have their pulse to the ground. They hope, in fact, that they're making the right decisions. However, the great ones out there, regardless of the market conditions, are out there making it happen. You know, there's many great companies out there and great leaders out there. Larry Chavez, Brian Elias, different folks out there that I'm very friendly with, that out there, they don't believe necessarily in recessionary times, that they're going to get out and make it happen, and they're going to control their own environment, I think, moving forward. So in summary, I just want to highlight a few things that we've talked about today, and then I'll turn it back to Jen if you have a particular question that I might be able to help with. The first element is that as you think about growth, it's not just about money, it's not just about top line, it's not just about your ego, it's also about opportunities. As you listen to this webinar, think about those people within your organization. Are you creating opportunities for them? Opportunities is not just giving them work to do. Opportunities is advancement. Opportunities allow them to grow and be at higher levels than they're presently at. The second is, I don't know how else to express it, but the environment is strong. The stars and planets are strong. As I said, yesterday at a Harvard meeting with all the leading manufacturers, builders in this country, there was not one that was not optimistic about 2017. You know, even in the economists that talked about the potential recession that might sort of slip in 27, 28 months from now, he said it was nothing like what it was in 2008. It would be a soft sort of entry into that recession. So even that is not that concerning. There's a beautiful runway, I think, for everyone out there if, in fact, you want to do the right things and grow. The third element here is leadership. Leadership alignment is critical. So as you're thinking about a lot of the questions I'm throwing out, you know, one of the key is to ask you, are the other key team members aligned with your vision, with your mission, with what you care about? Do you have champions? If you want to ever think about the level of growth in your business, you've got to think about champions. For many years, as people would propose ideas and thoughts to me, one of my first questions was not whether it was a good idea or a bad idea, but who's going to champion this moving forward to be successful. Are the technologies in place? You know, I think as we talked about it revolutionizing the industry, it's so important that you make sure the technologies are in place, the relationships in terms of some of the marketing strategies and digital opportunities that are out there are happening. Training. Training is a growth strategy. Training is an investment, not an expense. Are you making the right level of investment in your business moving forward? Your leadership. That leadership is probably as or more important than ever. You know, you've got to be a student of success when it comes to leadership. You've got to invest in yourself just as much as investing in the people, the products, and the systems. And lastly, I cannot emphasize enough, now is the time to act. Don't put yourself in a position that you're like a deer in headlights wondering what happened. Now is the time to make it happen. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I'm going to turn this back over to Jen. If you have a particular question, you know, feel free to send it in to Jen, or also you're always welcome to reach out to me either directly or through my telephone number here, and I'll be glad to try to help you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Mark. I think now we're going to be beginning our drum roll. We can have a drum roll, please. Today's lucky recipient of a Google Home is none other than Peyton Cron. Congratulations, Peyton! Woo! Peyton, please send an email to marketing@surefirelocal.com with your full mailing address, and we'll ship that right out. Congratulations. Also, wanted to give a huge thanks to Mark for joining us today. Thank you, Mark.
My pleasure.
Please do join us for more of our upcoming webinars. On February 13th, we'll have Scott Strike here, and he'll present on tips on making your website work for you. For details and more information on upcoming webinars, you can go to the link in our homepage, surefirelocal.com. Also, if you're interested in getting a Google Chromecast, you can send us an email and we can set up a complimentary digital marketing consultation. And lastly, if you'd like to grab a copy of Mark's book, Fit to Grow, just send us your mailing address to marketing@surefirelocal.com. We will have a survey that comes up right at the end of the webinar as we're closing out. We ask that you just take a minute to fill it out, let us know how we did today, let us know what topics you'd like to hear in the future, and thank you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everyone.